Chapter 6 "I want some brandy for my teeth," said Nanny Brown. She lay in the second bed from the end in Ward 3 of the West Park Hospital, in a flannel nightdress with a drawstring round the neck, because she didn't believe in showing bits of herself to the doctors. She had been old when Mrs. Traddle persuaded her to come to Switzerland with a stolen baby. And now she was very old indeed, shriveled and tired and ready to go, because she'd said her prayers every day of her life, and if God wasn't waiting to take her up to heaven, she'd want to know the reason why. But she was cross about her teeth. "Now, Mrs. Brown," said the nurse briskly, "you know we can't let you soak your teeth in that nasty stuff. Just pop them in that nice glass of disinfectant." "It isn't nice, it's smelly," grumbled Mrs. Brown. "I've always soaked my teeth in brandy, and then I drink the brandy. That's how I get my strength." And she had needed her strength, living in the Traddles' basement, helping to look after Raymond, but keeping an eye on Ben. She didn't hold with the way Lorena was bringing up Raymond. She could see how spoiled he was going to be, and when he was 3 she'd handed him over to another nanny, but she wouldn't let Lorena turn her out, not with Ben to look after. Mrs. Traddle might threaten her with the police if she said anything about the stolen baby. But the threat worked in both ways. "If you turn me out and the boy, I'll tell them everything, and who knows which one of us they'll believe," Nanny Brown had said. So she stayed in Traddle Towers and helped with a bit of sewing and ironing, and turned her back on what was going on in the nursery upstairs. And she'd been able to see that Ben at least was brought up properly. She couldn't stand the servants ordering him about, but she saw to his table manners that he spoke nicely and got his schooling, and he was a credit to her. That was the only thing that worried her. What would happen to Ben if she died? Mrs. Traddle hated Ben. She'd stop at nothing to get him sent away. "But I'm going to foil her," thought Nanny Brown. "Oh, yes, I'm going to stop her tricks." "There's a burglar under my bed," she said now. "I feel it. Have a look." "Now, Mrs. Brown," said the nurse, "we don't want to get silly ideas in our head, do we?" "It isn't silly," said Nanny peevishly. "London's full of burglars, and why not under my bed?" The nurse wouldn't look, though. She was one of those bossy ones. "What will your grandson say if you carry on like that?" she said, and walked away with her behind swinging. But when Ben came slowly down the ward, the old woman felt better at once. She'd been strict with him. No rude words, eat up every scrap you were given, yet she didn't mind admitting that if she loved anyone in the world, it was this boy. And the other patients smiled too as he passed their beds, because he was always so polite and friendly, greeting them and remembering their names. "Hello, Nanny." He always called her Nanny, not Grandma. She'd told him to. It sounded better. Now he laid a small bunch of lilies of the valley down beside her, and she shook her head at him. "I told you not to waste your money." She left him a few pounds out of her pension when she went into the hospital, and told him it had to last. Waste was wicked, but her gnarled fingers closed round the bunch, and she smiled. "How are you feeling?" Ben asked. "Oh, fine, fine," lied Nanny Brown. "And you? What's been going on at home?" Ben hesitated. He wanted to tell Nanny about his mysterious visitors, about how much he liked them, the strange feeling he'd had that they belonged to him. But he'd promised to say nothing, and anyway he'd been wrong because they didn't belong to him. So he just said, "Nothing much. I've got onto the football team, and Raymond's had another screaming fit." "That's hardly news," said Nanny Brown grimly. And then, "No one's been bothering you? That Mr. Fulton?" "No, not really. But do you think you're coming home soon, Nanny? It's better when you're there." Nanny patted his hand. "Bless you, of course I am. You just get on with your schooling, and remember, once you're grown up, no one can tell you what to do." Yes. It would be a long time till he was a man, and Nanny looked very ill. Fear was bad. Being afraid was about yourself, and you had to fight it, but it was for a moment. He was very much afraid whether it was selfish or not. It was very quiet in the ward when the visitors had gone. All the other patients lay back drowsily, glad to rest, but Nanny Brown sat up in bed as fierce as a sparrowhawk. There wasn't much time to waste, and she was lucky. It was the nice nurse from the Philippines who came round to take temperatures. Celeste, she was called, and she had a lovely smile and a tiny red rose tucked into her hair behind her ear. You could only see it when she bent down, but it always made you feel better, knowing it was there. Listen, dear, there's something I want you to do for me. Will you get me a piece of paper and an envelope? It's really important, or I wouldn't ask you." Celeste reached for Nanny's wrist and began to take her pulse. "I'll try, Mrs. Brown," she said, "but you'll have to wait till I finish my rounds." And she didn't forget. An hour later she came with the paper and a strong white envelope. "Have you got a pen?" Nanny Brown nodded. "Thank you, dear. That's a weight off my mind. You're a good, kind girl." Celeste smiled. That's right. She looked closely at the old woman's face. It wouldn't be long now. "I'll just make sure about the burglars," she said. She bent down to look, and as she did so Nanny Brown could see the little red rose tucked in the jet black hair. "Bless you," she said, and then, feeling much better, she began to write. So let's just talk about what happened in this chapter. It's pretty short, but what happens basically is that Ben comes to visit his grandmother and wants to tell her about the visitors who have come to him, but he doesn't because he doesn't think it's very important, and he doesn't want to bother her. He also wants to know when she's going to come home. And at the end of the chapter, Ben leaves and Nanny Brown asks one of the nurses to bring her an envelope and a piece of paper because she's going to write a letter. So what I want you to think about with this chapter, first of all, is do you think Nanny Brown is going to come home? How sick do you think she is? And the other thing I want you to think about is what is Nanny Brown writing? Who is she writing to, and what will be written in her letter?